At the height of the Second World War, the skies above Germany witnessed a transformation in aerial warfare. Strategic bombing, aiming to obliterate the foundations of the enemy's war machine, took center stage for the first time. In a formidable and controversial display of power, the air forces of the United States and Britain rained down nearly 3 million tons of explosives on German soil. The world's most advanced heavy bombers were at the heart of this aerial campaign. These aircraft, now icons of that era, signified a jump in aviation design and development. U.S. aircraft prioritized precision daylight bombing with robust defensive armaments. In contrast, British bombers opted for nighttime area bombing with an emphasis on larger bomb loads and electronic navigation aids. From the B-17 Flying Fortress to the Avro Lancaster, these aircraft were a huge presence in the air war over Europe. But did they truly influence the war as military strategists had envisioned? In 1939, Britain's strategic bomber force was ill-prepared. Its existing bomber fleet consisted of the most modern systems available, yet they were designed for daylight operations at relatively close range. In addition, British air doctrine during the interwar years pushed the idea that strategic bombers could reach their target with minimal losses. This meant that British aircraft, such as the Hampton, had limited defenses and poor survivability in daylight, a lesson that military leaders in London would soon learn. But Britain wasn't alone. None of the primary combatants at the outset of the war had the capability for prolonged, heavy, long-distance aerial strikes. Both France and Germany lacked heavy bomber units or structures akin to RAF Bomber Command. Of Britain's available bomber aircraft, only the Vickers Wellington had the range to reach Berlin. The Wellington's design stemmed from an Air Ministry specification in the 1930s that sought a twin-engined heavy bomber with an empty mass of 6,500 pounds. The Wellington had an all-metal geodetic framework and fabric skin, which gave it exceptional durability during operations. The aircraft could carry a substantial bomb load of 4,500 pounds over a range of 1,540 miles at an average cruising speed of 180 miles per hour. But as Britain's early strategy of daylight raids against German targets showed, the Wellington was no match for the air defenses of the Third Reich. Daylight bombing missions, especially two attacks on Wilhelmshaven's German fleet and naval facilities on the 14th and the 18th of December 1940, resulted in significant losses. Of the 36 Wellingtons sent by Bomber Command, 17 were lost as they faced Germany's strongest air defenses over the North Sea. Stung by the extent of their daylight losses, the RAF Bomber Command shifted to night operations. From March 1942, Britain began focusing on area bombing, targeting town centers during nighttime raids. This strategy aimed to weaken civilian morale through city destruction, believing that the resulting dislocation of residents would disrupt industrial production, even if factories remained untouched. The change in strategy coincided with the introduction of Britain's best and most iconic heavy bomber, the Avro Lancaster. It conducted 40% of sorties and dropped 68% of Bomber Command's total bomb tonnage between March 1942 and May 1945. The Avro Lancaster, renowned for its range and payload, could carry up to 22,000 pounds, or about 10,000 kilos, of bombs. It was the only Allied bomber equipped to hold the 12,000 pounds tall boy and 22,000 pounds Grand Slam bombs for specific targets. With a typical load of 7,000 pounds, its operational reach was approximately 1,570 miles. But relative to its American counterparts, the Lancaster had only light defensive armaments. Its standard variant included two 7.7mm Browning machine guns in the nose and dorsal turret, and 4 Browning machine guns in the tail turret. The Lancaster's relentless operational tempo and use against Germany's most valued targets led to an incredibly high loss rate. 58% of all aircraft sent into combat never returned from the skies over northern Europe. 55,573 men died flying with Bomber Command. For every 100 airmen who joined the service, 45 were killed, 6 were seriously wounded, and 8 were taken prisoner. Throughout Britain's strategic bombing campaign, the precision of the RAF bomber fleet markedly improved due to the advent of electronic navigation and targeting tools. By the end of 1944, Their ability to hit smaller targets surpassed even the US's daytime operations. Yet the British tactic of area bombing remained a key and controversial strategy until the war's conclusion. RAF aircraft devastated 61 major cities and 31 towns, destroying half of the urban area. As a result, 7.5 million Germans became homeless, 305,000 civilians died, and 780,000 were wounded, with cities like Cologne, Hamburg, and Dresden facing profound destruction. In the build-up to the Second World War, U.S. strategic bombardment theory proposed that a few modern bombers could precisely target and disrupt an enemy's war industry, leading to manufacturing halts or civilian panic and surrender. Consequently, national strategy, training, procurement, logistics, and R&D focused on creating a powerful air armada. The U.S. dedicated 40% of its war production to aircraft, prioritizing high-quality personnel for the United States Army Air Force and production roles. In 1935, the Air Corps introduced the 4-engine B-17 heavy bomber, an air system designed to execute its strategic vision. The B-17 was highly advanced and, depending on the model, equipped with up to 12 50-caliber machine guns for self-defense. With a standard payload of 5,000 to 6,000 pounds, these bombers were also fitted with a specialized daylight visual bomb sight. American strategists believed heavy bomber formations could approach targets either undetected or effectively fend off attackers, and expected significant enemy engagement only over the target areas. Mirroring the British experience, this thinking would soon be challenged by the operational realities over the skies of Northern Europe. In 1942, the U.S. 8th Air Force moved to England, with the first bomber arriving on the 2nd of July. The 8th flew its first mission on the 17th of August, when it dispatched 12 B-17 bombers against German strategic targets in northern France. Notably, the raid was led by Colonel Paul Tibbets, who would later pilot the Enola Gay. Throughout 1942, U.S. bombers mostly targeted strategic German sites in France and other neighboring countries. This period of the U.S. bombing campaign, while adding pressure on the Luftwaffe, was criticized for its lack of direct impact on the war effort. It wasn't until early 1943 that the 8th Air Force started targeting the German home territory. On June 11, 1943, the U.S. dispatched 168 bombers to target Wilhelmshaven's submarine facilities, losing 8 planes. 2 days later, raids on Bremen and Kiel saw losses of 26 from 122 and 26 from 60 bombers, translating to 21% and 43% loss rates respectively. German defenses were noticeably hardening. By June 1943, Germany's fighter production surged to over 1,000 monthly. In response to intensified Allied bombings, Germany concentrated its fighters, with 70% of the Luftwaffe's fighter force stationed in the Western Theater. Germany set up 5 defensive fighter belts across occupied territories and its homeland, assisted by radar early warning systems. These radar systems, connected to ground stations, guided German fighters. Each station controlled a fighter within a designated area, creating a defensive grid. The Ruhr also had a continuous searchlight belt combined with anti-aircraft artillery. But the Americans pressed on. On August 17, 1943, marking their first operational anniversary, U.S. bombers launched their most ambitious raid yet. 376 B-17 aircraft were dispatched to target crucial ball-bearing plants between Frankfurt and Nuremberg, responsible for over 40% of Germany's production, as well as the Messerschmitt factory in Regensburg. Despite the heavy German defenses, including 300 fighters, the Americans sustained a 19% loss rate, with 60 bombers lost and 100 damaged. In contrast, 25 German fighters were taken down. In mid-October, a follow-up raid in the same area marked the conclusion of unescorted daytime bombing. Out of nearly 300 bombers, 220 reached their target, but 60 were shot down, and 138 were damaged. The heavy losses led crews to dub October 14th as Black Thursday. Air crews were incurring a higher casualty rate than any other branch of U.S. forces. U.S. air chiefs needed a solution to counter growing Luftwaffe activity. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang, with its exceptional endurance, opened the door for long-range escorts, joining the 8th Air Force in November 1943. By early 1944, fighter pilots were urged to engage enemy fighters actively instead of strictly guarding bombers. This shift propelled the US bombing strategy in 1944 to aggressively target the Luftwaffe's key facilities and Germany's broader military-industrial complex. The role of strategic bombing in the Second World War remains hotly debated. Critics argue that the extensive bombing had minimal impact on Germany's war production and collective spirit. RAF Bomber Command's area bombing strategy, targeting civilian morale, drew criticism for its perceived ineffectiveness and inhumanity. Additionally, the effectiveness and timing of U.S. precision bombing campaigns have also received criticism. While strategic bombing did not bring Germany to its knees independently, it significantly eroded the German war effort. The bombing campaign strained German resources, disrupted industrial production, and made the regime's task of continuing the war more challenging. Notably, the campaign stretched the Luftwaffe to the limit and diverted crucial German fighter resources away from the Eastern Front. But it came at a significant cost. The strategic bombing offensive led to the death of approximately 100,000 Allied aircrew and inflicted up to 1 million fatal casualties upon Germany.